Good morning to everyone. Today we're here for a call to action, and we're calling all of the NAACP peers, the Forward Together Tomorrow Monday movement, and all citizens of North Carolina to be here on Thursday when the legislature comes back to begin dealing with the issue of redistricting. We're calling on people to be here at 10. We're going to have people here picketing and walking around the General Assembly and inside to hold them accountable. It is time in North Carolina for rigging of elections, racist rigging of elections, to stop. And the reason we're here today is Sunday was the 52nd anniversary of the passage of the 1965 voting rights. I want us to think about that for a second. This was 52 years ago, the Voting Rights Act was passed. 2013, it was gutted. So we have less voting rights protection today than we had in 52 years ago. Our legislature, this General Assembly, because of the all-white caucus of extremists, I do not say Republicans, extremists, have been illegally and unconstitutionally, illegally constituted body for more than 6 years. They rigged the election in order to get power, and we believe that it is time for them to repent and end the anti-democracy crusade to rig elections, and that they, number two, need to cease from any further passing of bills until they abide by the ruling of the Supreme Court, the unanimous ruling of the Supreme Court, and the ruling of our federal courts to redraw the lines properly, and until a new legislature that is properly elected is seated. This General Assembly used racist measures. This is the language of the courts. This is not about party, it was about race. They used racial lies, redistricting plans. They stacked and packed over 51% of African Americans into 27 out of 120 House seats, 49% of African Americans into 19 out of 50 Senate seats, and thereby created what we have called apartheid districts throughout North Carolina, both in the state legislature and in the United States congressional representation. We saw a fundamental move and change in the demographics of our representation that does not represent the voters, but it represents a rigged election. Now, what is interesting, and what all North Carolinians should understand about this, is how racist gerrymandering also connects to other extreme policies. That is, this legislature, first under the leadership of now Senator Tom Tillis, and then Speaker Moore, and then Berger, they led them into this racist redistricting that the courts approved. I want to keep emphasizing this is not some innuendo pushed by the NAACP or the Forward Together Tomorrow movement. This is the Roberts Court, the very court that we never thought might do something like this, ruled unanimously. In fact, they ruled unanimously after our own state court got it wrong. I hold in my hand, we were the first, the NAACP was the first body to file a case against these racist redistricting plans. We filed it in state court. Our state Supreme Court at that time got it wrong. We appealed to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court sent it back to the state court and said that they had looked at the laws wrong when they said that these districts were in fact illegal. The other plaintiffs in the federal case were able to use much of the discovery that came out in our case. We had no part in that case, but the facts that were brought up in our case helped set the stage for the federal case, and the federal courts ruled unanimously against our legislature. Now here's the final point. They have used this power gained through racialized redistricting, but they have used it to pass anti-worker bills. They've used it to block passing living wages. They've used this power to pass anti-health care legislation, anti-poor people legislation, anti-women legislation, anti-worker legislation, anti-democracy legislation, anti-immigrant legislation, and anti-gay legislation. So they gain power through racist redistricting, but they've used that power to hurt the poorest among us, the workers among us, the immigrants among us, the women among us, the gay among us, and the sick among us. And that is why we are calling for them to cease any more legislation until a new legislature is set that is constitutional. And we are calling for them to abide by the order of the court. And today we're here and we're starting a mass campaign today through social media and others to invite North Carolinians to be here on Thursday to stand up for accountability in elections, to end rigged, racially driven elections in North Carolina. It is not compliant even with our state constitution that says that equal protection under the law is illegal, and that says that all power ultimately comes from the people, and it is out of line with our federal constitution. It is un-American. It is not what we should be doing in the 21st century, and it is a shame and a disgrace. 52 years later, we are fighting these battles here in North Carolina. It is time for it to be over. And I'll take questions from members of the media. Yes, ma'am.
Remember, the courts decided last week that legislators do not have to have a special election before they can hold their next session. So why are you still calling on them to not do the work that they're doing?
Because we believe, from a deep moral perspective, that we have an unconstitutionally constituted legislature, that they are illegal. The courts have said they're illegal. And so we're saying they ought to, when they have been found guilty, they should do, the first work they should do is changing these maps. And then because they've been caught guilty, and for 6 years, not 1 year, not 1 month, but for 6 years, we've had an illegally constituted legislature that has passed all these regressive bills. They have no moral standing to continue to pass legislation until we have a legislature that is fair, that is constitutional, and that is elected according to the proper rules of our American democracy, and not rigged through this racist gerrymandering. Dr. Spearman, I want him to have a comment if he would have one, and then I'll take more questions. This is our third vice president and the president of the Council of Churches in North Carolina.
I think what Dr. Barber stated earlier was very, very clear. And I would just add to that, if to make America great again means that a unconstitutionally constituted General Assembly continues to put laws in place, if that's what it takes to make America great again, I would just question whether or not America was great in the first place. It just does not make sense that an unconstitutionally constituted General Assembly be allowed to continue doing the outlawish and roguish things that they're doing here in the state of North Carolina.
We filed an amicus brief with the courts, with this federal court case. We count the fact that the court said you can't slow down anymore. That is a major victory. Yes, we wish the courts had also ordered an immediate election. We wish that had happened. That did not happen, and we're not in agreement with that, because in the past there have been special elections, and we believe there could be a special election. Now, we've not actually filed any legal work to say let's nullify the legislation that an unconstitutionally constituted body has passed. But North Carolinians should be crying out. We should use every moral framework we have to cheat and win elections, and particularly to use racism. Remember, this is the same legislature that, because they were illegally constituted, they were able to pass the worst voter suppression law we've seen since Shelby. And they got caught doing that. And the court said, not us, that was such a surgical racism. Surgical. So it is important that North Carolinians understand, and as we talk to you as members of the media, these are no longer just things the NAACP is saying. People can't just dismiss this. Right. Say, well, these are just some upset people because they didn't win election. These are just Democrats. No. The so-called conservative Roberts Court, and our lawyers have told us that very few times have courts come back, Supreme Court, even under other justices, and rule unanimously, twice, that in terms of redistricting and in terms of voter suppression, this legislature, the leadership and it was the all-white caucus of the leadership of the Republican Party that I call extremists, we call extremists. And the reason I do that, because my granddad was a Republican, and Republican then didn't mean what it means today. They passed these laws and then used this racism, used this illegal way of getting power to then hurt women, pass laws that hurt women. People forget the photo ID bill that they passed that was proven unconstitutional hurt 50% of women in this state. Women in this state. So they refuse. We asked them to put living wage. 80% of North Carolinians want to vote on raising the minimum wage. This legislature refused to put that. 500,000 people in this state have been denied health care. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,800 people probably have died, according to studies at Harvard. 30,000 veterans have been denied health care through Medicaid expansion because an illegally, unconstitutionally constituted legislature has used power in that way. This is what we're talking about. It is immoral, and we believe it is wrong at the core and should cease. Yes, ma'am.
What are you hoping to see when they roll out the criteria on Thursday?
Well, first of all, we need an open process. We need an open process. We need a process that follows the mandates of the law, the mandates of the Voting Rights Act, the mandates of the Constitution. Last time they argued, there's two strange arguments that this legislature has made and they've lost. In voter suppression, they argued that since Section 5 was not in place, pre-clearance, that retrogression, I was in the courtroom when they said that, when he said retrogression was okay because it was just politics. Well, the court said no, retrogression is not okay. On these redistricting maps, if you remember, they argued that they were following the Voting Rights Act by increasing the number of African Americans in majority districts. But they were actually violating the Voter Act, and they were misusing the Voter Rights Act, the courts have now said, to stack and pack. That is, what they did was not, because actually we gained an extra African American Senate seat, but the way they drew the maps, they devalued and diminished the influence of the African American and minority vote in other districts. Now, this is an important point. The Voting Rights Act was not just put in place to elect African Americans. It was put in place to surely elect African Americans who had been historically denied, but also to empower the minority vote, the African American vote, so that it would have influence throughout the political system. When you stack and pack the black vote, you are actually perverting the goals of the Voting Rights Act and trying to use stacking and packing as a way to diminish that power. And that's why even the Roberts Court, I want to keep saying that, even the Roberts Court, even judges that were appointed by Republican presidents had to agree this was unanimously unconstitutional.
Okay, but what do you...
Yeah, Gary? Well, our lawyers now, first of all, as I said, fairness in the map, we don't have anything to review. So our lawyers right now are in the process of, and Thursday we want to see, they will be testifying when the hearings, we'll be outlining our plans. We're not going to preempt what they're doing right now. We want to see, the courts have given pretty strict guidelines for them. And the first thing we want them to do is to follow the orders of the court. And on Thursday, when people come here, our lawyers will be presenting more and more about what we want in actual matter. I don't want to speak to that specifically today because it's such legal sensitivity. But the first thing we want is an open process. We want the maps to follow the mandates of the court. Thank God the courts are going to review these maps. And number three, we want this legislature to stop passing legislation because they are unconstitutionally constituted. It's Gary.
So are you willing to accept that perhaps new maps, that when they are elected, when elections are in these new maps, there may be fewer African American legislators actually in the legislature, only they may be wielding more influence?
I don't even think that's a premise that because the law has been very clear that you can't reduce the number of legislators. Texas tried that. They tried to reduce, and that was found wrong as well. What you can't do, the law says, is what they did. Again, they stacked and packed, and actually said.
And they gave you a record number.
Well, that's their argument. That was their argument.
That's what the numbers show.
Well, that's what I'm saying. They gave a number, but In doing so, they undermined impact and undermined influence. And so the reality is, it is a false win. It is a false win to stack black voters so you can increase maybe by one, I think in the Senate was one or whatever it was, a new black person, but then you undermine the power of the black vote in 20 districts or 30 districts. That's not progress. So but we already know what they can't do is take away. What they can't also do is use stacking and packing as a way of diminishing the power of the black vote. This is very delicate stuff. It is very delicate. And it is because we have a history of discrimination in this state. And people should understand this. Prior to Shelby, any state could have been relieved from being under the Voting Rights Act preclearance if that state for 10 years could have refused to engage in discrimination. None of the states did that. One of the good things I love about the NAACP is we challenge Democrats and Republicans. Check the record. Ever since the Voting Rights Act was in place, we have fought redistricting under Democrats. We fought it under Republicans because we're not fighting it from the perspective of party. We're fighting it from the perspective of the Constitution and ensuring that the African American and minority vote is not diminished and that it is not stacked and packed and thereby nullified. Any other questions?
On Thursday, are you planning on like a sort of an arrest situation?
Well, no, I don't know about that. I always tell people we don't ever plan to get arrested. We feel like that's the people's house and we ought to be able to go in there. We're challenging arrests now. Remember, the courts threw out 968 arrests, I think, in 2013. So they arrested us illegally then, too. So we're challenging. What we are saying to people is this is your house. These are your sidewalks. Bring your pickets. Bring your signs. Walk around the legislature. Now the courts have ruled. Remember, they used to not let us take signs inside, and the court said you can't do that. Go inside, walk the halls, be in the hearings. When they open up these hearings, we're going to be in there in mass form. We're going to have our lawyers pushing because what we must do. And let me just say this: the role of the NAACP and the Forward Together movement. Our job is not to protect Democrats or to protect Republicans or to protect any particular black or white legislators. Our job with our lawyers is to demand that the legislature does not go in violation of the Constitution and to uncover, call out, challenge, and have ruled unconstitutional any means of racist gerrymandering or racist voter suppression. That is the singular role of the NAACP, always has been and will continue to be. Thank you all so much, and God bless you. Take care.